we are making coffee cake and scones this morning. So our recommendation when you're taking virtual classes with us is to have your ingredients prepared and kind of ready before you get started. And if you're like, well, I missed that memo, no worries. Go ahead and start gathering your things now. Well, I do want to suggest that you have some sort of kitchen towel that's clean, that's dry. And if you want to put an apron on, you can do that. I've been wearing some half aprons. And also, you can see over here, I have this red bucket. Now, you don't necessarily need a bucket, but that has my cleaner in it and a wet towel. So if you need to clean your station, you might want to have something that you use at home that you're going to be able to do that with. We definitely want to make sure we're clean and sanitary when we're working in the kitchen, whether you're here or you're at home. I'm sure you're going to be sharing this with other people or your neighbors, so we want to keep our hands washed. So if you haven't washed your hands yet, go ahead and do that. I washed mine. I'm also going to be wearing gloves. You certainly don't need to wear gloves. That's completely up to you. If you've never worn gloves before, I would suggest not doing it because it's almost like you need to train yourself how to bake and cook with gloves on because it is a barrier between your hands and what you're doing. So the only thing that could be done on a mixer or a hand mixer today would be the batter for the coffee cake. Everything else, we're doing it the good old-fashioned way where you mix it by hand, and that is the appropriate way to mix it, whether I'm making a small batch like we are today or a really large batch, okay? The first thing we're going to be doing is the streusel topping, and I do measure the ingredients on camera because if you haven't used a scale before and you're like, well, I have a scale, I'm really interested in doing that, I do walk you through it. And so if you already have yours measured, maybe you can just kind of watch, double check, make sure that everything is good. If you feel like you have to remeasure something, you can do that. And we're going to go step by step through this streusel recipe. Once the streusel is made, which is a pretty easy thing to make, then we're gonna go ahead and move on to the coffee cake batter. So my suggestion is, if your butter is still in the fridge right now, go ahead and pull your butter out and let it sit and start to get a little bit softened, not melted, not microwave softened, but a little bit of the chill taken off of it, okay? And that goes for the streusel and the scones. If your butter has been already sitting out or it was sitting out since yesterday, go ahead and pop that in the fridge for a few minutes just to kind of help it firm up a little bit, okay? So if your butter is completely room temperature, put it back in the fridge for a little while. If it's still in the fridge, go ahead and pull that out. I'm gonna let you do that now, and I'm gonna pause so that you can get your butter taken care of. So that is for, like I said, the streusel and for the scones. You would wanna do that now, all right? So go ahead and take care of that. I pulled mine out right before class, so mine was in the fridge and I pulled it out. All right, I hope you have your butter taken care of. So what we're gonna do is we are gonna measure out our flour. For the streusel, it is gonna be all-purpose flour, and I like to have my recipe nearby. I'm actually gonna put it up in front here. And I encourage you to take notes on your recipe because, you know, if you go to make your recipe again in like a week or so, you might forget some of the extra details that you were like, ooh, I should have made a note of that. So you may want to have a pen handy, and if you need to jot anything down, you can do that. And that's going to kind of help you for the next time you make it. I have a lot of students that say when they come to class, if they make the recipes within the same week as when they made them the first time with us, they actually are able to remember it better for the future. So that's another little tip that, like, if you make it sooner rather than later, again, then you're going to be able to hold on to that information a little bit better in your head. And so if you're using a scale, you're going to turn your scale on, okay? And you're not going to be able to see the display on my scale, but it has 0, 0, 0 right now, and it's on. And so then I'm going to sit my bowl on that I'm going to actually measure my flour in, and my bowl weighs something. So what you need to do before you start putting ingredients in here is you need to press the tare button, and that's spelled T-A-R-E, and pressing that button will zero everything out again. And so if you zero it out again, now it's only going to be weighing the ingredients that you put in there, okay? So most everything in baking gets weighed for the ingredients, which this might be the first time that you've heard this. You know, in the professional industry, we weigh everything because if I had everyone that's on here today, we have, looks like 26 people on with devices right now. And so if I had everyone measure out 1 cup of flour and we weighed all of it, do you think it would be the same? No. Okay. So measuring it in cups, it really varies on the amount. If we weigh it, then it's actually that amount. Okay. And it's pretty precise. But you know, if you don't have a scale, don't worry. You see on the recipe that I put 1/4 of a cup plus 3 tablespoons. So it sounds a little strange, but I try to get it as close as I can to the amount. And you know, when you're living in Chattanooga, it's going to be very much this amount. I will say that we deal with a lot of humidity here. So measuring a cup of flour here and weighing it is going to be different than measuring a cup of flour and weighing it maybe somewhere where it's a little drier. Yours is probably going to weigh a little bit less. So, you know, you're going to do the best you can with the measurements and kind of see how it goes for you, depending on where you are. And my scale already turned off, so I'm just turning it back on real quick, making sure it says 0. I have my big bin down here. You might be able to see that in the top of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and weigh 2.5 ounces of flour. And again, I'm going over this in more detail at the beginning, and then as we go through things, I'll go a little faster, but I like to explain it first, what's happening. So I have my 2.5 ounces of flour, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure out, I'm just going to go down the list. So my butter. Now, this is unsalted butter, but we have lots of questions like, what if I'm using salted butter? Then I, you know, maybe would remove the salt altogether because it's just a pinch today of the salt. So if you're using salted butter, add no extra salt to the recipe. If you're using unsalted, then you'll still do that little pinch. So I've got unsalted butter here. I'm going to open it. 2 ounces is half a stick. So I have my little stick of butter here, and I'm going to cut it in half. You could weigh it as well if you want to double check, but I know that it's pretty close. So if I got to make sure every time I put something on my scale that it says 0 the whole way across. So it doesn't say 0, you're going to press that tare button. And I'm just going to weigh my butter, and I did a pretty good job cutting it in half because it says exactly 2 ounces. And so I'm going to sit that off to the side. I'm not going to put that in my bowl yet. And you know, I always sanitize my station and my table, so food can definitely go on the surface, and it should be the same way at your house. You should have it clean enough that you can sit food on your countertop. And so now I'm going to the brown sugar, the same like if you're measuring it with cup measure, you're going to use the cup measurements. If you're using the scale, I'm going to measure mine into a separate little container here, and that one looks a little bit dirty. I have a stack here, so I just have to kind of make sure it's clean. And I'm zeroing out my scale again with my container on it, and I'm going to do 2.5 ounces of brown sugar as well. Okay, and if you go over a little bit, you got to take a little out, and you kind of have to play with the scale, okay, and get it to the right amount. Now, my scale goes to the 1/10 of an ounce, so, you know, it actually says 2.5. If yours goes to the 100th and you're dealing with another column, I would ignore that number because it's really hard to get it, you know, to the 100th amount. So I would just ignore it like it's not even there. Because my scale, I don't know what the 100th is because it's not even on there. All right. And then I am going to do a pinch of salt. And I'm going to go ahead and just put that right in with my flour. So a good pinch. A pinch is supposed to be an 1/8 of a teaspoon, really, is what it is. Some people have an 1/8 of a teaspoon measure, but you're just going to do one good pinch. And so when you're pinching, you're using your thumb, pointer finger, grab a good pinch, drop it in there. And then we also have cinnamon. And so I kind of have this big carton of cinnamon, but whatever you have, I'm sure is good, but you want it to definitely be ground. And we're going to put 2 teaspoons in here. So, you know, when you're measuring out your cinnamon, you want to be very careful that you level off the top with your finger or the back of a knife, something flat, because a heaping teaspoon of something is very different than a level teaspoon. And, you know, most recipes, it doesn't say heaping. It's going to just tell you the amount. So then you're going to need to level it off. So right now I have in my bowl, I have the flour, the salt, and the cinnamon in here. So I'm going to give that a little stir. Now, I'm going to use my hand. You could certainly, it's always handy to have some little spoons nearby. You could use a spoon to do this part, okay? I tend to get my hands in there. And stir that up. Go ahead and put your brown sugar. And so now what we're going to do is I would suggest, you know, using a butter knife, using a little paring knife, either one. Go ahead and cut your butter into smaller pieces. So I'm going to make like these little pats and then probably cut that in half. So go ahead and cut your butter into little pats, little squares, and then take those squares, cut them in half, and start adding them into your dry ingredients. Now, you know, when you look at the method for the coffee cake streusel, that's what we're making right now. It says combine all ingredients and flake with your hands, okay? Now, you can, you know, that's what we're doing, but it does make better sense to go ahead and make sure all the dry ingredients are mixed together first, like we just did, so that everything is going to be distributed somewhat evenly, okay? Because, you know, if you just throw the salt and cinnamon in there and start putting your butter on top of it, we're going to be crumbling this. And once you crumble it, you know, there could be large amounts of cinnamon or salt stuck to a piece of butter, and that's going to cause some problems for you, okay? Now, what we're going to do is, I mean, this method is called cutting in the butter, and we're going to work with this until it gets very crumbly, and there's enough butter in this dough that, or in this streusel, it's not really a dough, to make a dough, but we don't want to make a dough, okay? We want it to be crumbly in the end. So basically, we want the flour to look kind of moistened, but we don't want it to come to one dough, one piece. So if you see at any point yours starts to do that, you're going to want to stop. Because in the end, streusel should be very crumbly. We're going to be sprinkling it. So you want to think about that. Like, it needs to be crumbled to the point where we're just going to still be able to sprinkle it, and you're not having to divide the dough pieces. Now, this is, you know, might be the first time you're doing this. So we're learning together. So if you're like, oh, yep, mine totally turned into a dough like Chef Heather said it might. Well, you know what? You're going to break it into those little pieces, and we're still going to use it, and it's going to be okay. But I'm just telling you the things that you're going to watch for, okay? So what you're going to do is, I always tell everybody, before you go in there, go ahead and get your flaking hands ready, okay? So I call these my flaking hands. We use these to mix several different things. So what I'm talking about with flaking hands is your thumbs are going to brush across your fingers. So you're going to kind of crumble, okay? Pretend you're crumbling. So go ahead and go into your bowl. Coat your butter with your dry ingredients. It's about to get a little messy here. And you're going to go ahead and start to crumble, okay? And so we're not squeezing, we're not kneading. I'm flaking the butter off my hands and using a motion that's starting to crumble everything, okay? So flake that butter through your hands. Continue to flake. You know, some people, when they're cutting in things, they use a fork or they use one of those wire pastry blenders. And that's a hand tool if you've not seen one before. I kind of like to use my hands because I feel like using one of those tools does mash it together, and this keeps it more airy before it starts to mash and make a dough. So you can see mine is still, I'm going to hold it closer to the camera. It's still very, very dry at this point, but I'm making the butter pieces smaller and doing that by flaking my thumbs across my fingers. Okay, so try not to squeeze. Tell your brain, don't squeeze, because you're going to want to squeeze, because that's what we're used to doing, or we're used to kneading, or we're used to pressing, and we're not doing any of those things right now. We're literally flaking that butter and dry ingredients across our hands, and that's going to help you keep control so that it doesn't get to the point where it's a dough. And, you know, you're using techniques that you may have never used before, or you're like, I've never mixed anything with my hands. I don't like this because it feels grainy and it feels messy. And, you know, sometimes, you know, my pastry chef at school, I tell people this all the time because it was so true. And I didn't realize it when I first started school. I was 19 when I started culinary school, and it was funny because I was in a room full of probably 75% of the kids were 19, and so no one wanted to get their hands dirty. And our pastry chef was like, "I'm going to teach you how to use the best tool attached to your arm," and she was talking about our hands. So we learned how to do things with our hands and how much better it can be sometimes. And so if you look at my mixture now, it looks very cinnamony. It looks very brown. I'm not seeing, when I look close, I don't see any just dusted flour in there, and it's still crumbly, okay? So this is where I'm gonna stop. You know, you still want it to be what seems like very dry, but it's all gonna be kind of a darker brown color at this point, okay? All right? Once your streusel's done and you are getting washed up, you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna sit your streusel to the side, and we're gonna start to gather and bring the ingredients to our station for the coffee cake batter, okay? So go ahead and do that now. Well, we're gonna go ahead and start measuring for our coffee cake batter. I'm using a mixer for this part, but you could use a hand mixer or you could do this by hand. A bowl and a good old-fashioned spoon will work just fine, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure my ingredients with you all. And so first we're gonna combine the sugar and the yogurt. And so I'm gonna go ahead and put that into the mixer, and I'm gonna skip over the flour for just a second. So I'm gonna just grab a container. You could have a bowl. And again, I'm scaling most of my ingredients, but you can use the cup measure that is on there if you need to. And so bring my bin of sugar over. It's kind of noisy. And so it's going to be 5.2 ounces if you're weighing. And again, you know, there is room for less error if you're weighing your ingredients. Not that I judge you if you decide not to weigh your ingredients. I know lots of folks that still use cup measure, and they do just fine with that. And so then our yogurt as well, I already have it measured. I'm just going to double check because my friends measured my stuff, and I'm sure they did great, but you know, Chef Ted's laughing. Okay, so it is 8 ounces, very good. Shout out to Noah and Jeff. And I'm gonna go ahead and put this into the mixer, okay? So I like, you know, in my recipes, I like using other ingredients sometimes. And when I say other ingredients, I, you know, use yogurt, or I use applesauce for things. And so I just see, you know, how I can incorporate other ingredients that maybe are a little healthier for us. And the yogurt, not that what we're making is extremely healthy, but you know, using a couple ingredients that are a little more healthy, it can be helpful. So let's just go back and review for a minute. So we did step number 1, we combined the sugar and the yogurt, and I went ahead and just put that into my mixer, okay? Now I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna weigh and measure everything else. So then we're not going back and forth, and I can just say, okay, we're gonna go ahead, we've measured our ingredients, we're gonna move on to the mixing part of it. So let's go ahead and do the flour now. And so I'm going to measure out 12 ounces of flour. All right. And I put my cup on my scale. I go ahead and zero it out. Let's see if I can get 12 ounces to fit in this cup. Sometimes I realize I'm using something that's a little too small. I'm sure you do the same thing at your house sometimes, where you have to switch bowls or containers or whatnot. So I wouldn't be able to put a lid on it, that's for sure, but I won't have to do that today. So I almost have my 12 ounces. I always suggest, you know, with baking, it needs to be very precise. So you're gonna do 12.0 and make sure it's as precise as possible. You know, with other things, sometimes it doesn't matter if it varies a little bit. Now, we're going to go ahead and go to the oil. You can use canola oil or vegetable oil. So it says 4, and that's fluid ounces. So that means it's supposed to be liquid measured, not weighed. If it just says ounces, that means weighed. If it says fluid ounces, then it needs to be liquid measured, okay? And someone's asked about the yogurt. Is Greek yogurt okay? I find that I've used Greek yogurt for this before, and it does, like, sometimes it has too much acid in it. It's more acidic. So you can try it, see what kind of results you get. Sometimes it doesn't work as well as you'd think it would just substituting it. So my suggestion would be either substituting sour cream or using yogurt that might even have a little sweetener to it. That would be my suggestion. But if Greek yogurt is the only thing you have, then that's what you're going to use, because, you know, we're not spending as much time away from our homes as we normally do. And sometimes we're like, well, we're not going to buy this extra ingredient right now, or we're not going to run to the store. And I understand that. So, you know, go ahead and do that. Now, fluid ounces, you're going to use a liquid measuring cup, okay? And so I have my liquid measuring cup here. And you always want to make sure you get down to the level of the measuring cup to actually see where you're at with it. Because if you're standing straight up over your measure and you're trying to tell whether it's right at the line, it's going to be impossible to tell exactly what the measure is. You really have to come down right to the line with your eyes and make sure that it is 4 ounces. Now, I will say that you can substitute applesauce instead of this oil, and you could do the same amount, 4 ounces. I've done that many times, especially when I'm cooking at home with my kids, and I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and put applesauce in this instead today, okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and measure my baking soda. That's next on the list. So baking soda, it's a 1/2 teaspoon. So I got my baking soda and now my baking powder. I'm kind of particular about my baking powder, and I will say that it's been a little challenging to find. I have this tiny little tub. Usually I have this big tub, and I haven't been able to get my big tub. So what I look for in a baking powder is that it is gluten-free, because we have lots of friends that come to our classroom that have celiacs or need gluten-free, and so that allows us to not have a problem with this. But then also it doesn't have any sulfates or sulfites in it. So I'm kind of more, you know, particular with the one I buy. And you probably were like, well, I thought they were all the same. But if you actually like read the labels of the baking powder at the store, they can be very different, okay? And you're going to get different qualities as well. So it's going to be 1 teaspoon. At least I like how the little container has this spot to level off your teaspoons. That's kind of nice. My big tub doesn't have that. All right, so that was 1 1/4 teaspoon. So I did 1 teaspoon and then I did 1/4 teaspoon. And then we do have 1 teaspoon of vanilla as well. And you can see, like, you know, I have my side towel here. Which view do they have up right now? They have both. Okay, I'm going to switch mine back to both too. So you see, I have this towel that kind of hangs on my apron. This is my dry towel. And, you know, I had cinnamon on this, I had baking powder, I had different things. And I wipe them off if I'm going to use them again. I don't necessarily rinse them. I just wipe them with a dry towel, and then you can use it again. And then when I'm done baking, you know, then I wash everything. That way it's not such a mess. So we have our teaspoon of vanilla extract. You know, lots of people ask me in class and on the virtual classes what kind of vanilla I'm using, because it's a much larger bottle. And this is Mexican vanilla. I purchased it through Amazon, actually. I do make my own vanilla as well, but I have a batch in the works, but it's definitely not ready right now. All right, so now we're ready to start mixing, okay? I'm gonna move some of my ingredients out of the way because I have my whole table here, and you probably do too. Maybe your countertop is filled up. Give yourself some working space and get things moved out of your way. And, you know, it's not required to have a sifter. It wasn't one of the items on the equipment list. But if you have any sort of strainer, like that you wash fruit or strain pasta with, that has like a finer wire mesh, you could sift your ingredients, okay? Now, if you don't have any sort of sifter that you can use, I can see there's a little piece of flour in here, just getting that out. Then what I would suggest is putting your dry ingredients into a bowl and mixing it slowly with a whisk. that really helps break up the dry, if you have any lumps in your dry ingredients. Now, us living here in Chattanooga, I mentioned it's really, really humid. And so it tends to lump up our dry ingredients and it causes some problems in our baking. We end up with lumps in our cakes or muffins or stuff like that. So you could use just a whisk. That's kind of a little trick without a sifter. I have my sifter over here off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and bring it over a little bit closer. Okay, and someone asked, is there a substitution for baking soda? I mean, not really, but there's such a small amount in this recipe. You could up the baking powder to 1.5 teaspoons. Not really like, you know, substitute baking powder instead, but just increase the baking powder a little bit, and then that's going to help with that. Now, you know, when you're using only baking soda in a recipe, you have to have an acid that interacts with it. Now with this recipe, we don't have to worry about that because you're just going to be doing baking powder, which already has the acid in it, and you shouldn't have a problem with the leavening. So just increase that baking powder a little bit and you should be pretty good to go. All right. What I would never suggest doing is replacing baking powder with baking soda. My husband did that one day when I was teaching class. He's like, we made pancakes and we were, you know, we were out of this, so I replaced this. And the problem with that is, like, you know, he used baking soda instead of baking powder, but then there wasn't an acid to react and make it work. So he's like, they didn't rise, they were really heavy, I didn't know what was wrong with them. And he showed me them whenever I got home, and I was like, what did you use again? And so we talked through it, and I was like, well, it probably would have worked had you added an acid to the recipe. He was like, oh, I knew you'd have the answer, okay? And so, but sometimes it's still trial and error. You know, if I have to use something different, it doesn't always turn out as perfectly as I want to the first time. I might have to test it a few times like that, okay? All right, so back to this. We talked about if you have a sifter, great. If you have a piece of parchment to sift it on, that's cool. Or if you need to use a bowl, you can use a bowl today. I do prefer a piece of parchment because it does keep it more loose, okay? Now, before we start mixing this, I want to go ahead and stop and ask you to go ahead and preheat your ovens. I never preheat mine like too much ahead of time because I feel like it wastes electricity and it wastes gas. So I'm going to have you go to your ovens and turn your ovens on to 350 now. And that should be plenty of time for everyone because we're still a little ways out from getting this in the oven. And so run to your oven, 350, no convection. And I'll meet you right back here because my oven's really close right now. So go ahead and do that, 350, 350, no convection. And then I always tell everybody, peek in your oven, make sure there's nothing in there because there could be a surprise from somebody else, right? All right, so hopefully you've preheated your oven. Hopefully you have all your ingredients ready to go. So we're gonna go ahead and start on step number 1 under coffee cake batter. I'm using my mixer. You can use your hand mixer, and you could also mix this with a wooden spoon in a bowl, okay? So I'm gonna lower my mixer down carefully, go ahead and lock it down, and I'm gonna go ahead and put it on speed 1. Do you wanna spotlight the mixer now? Chef Ted's gonna spotlight the mixer or my table area so you can just see a little bit better. So I'm mixing the sugar with the yogurt right now, okay, until the sugar dissolves. So what you're gonna need is probably some sort of spatula that you're gonna be able to scrape down. So I've mixed for just a few seconds, and I'm on speed 1. Speed 1, speed 2 is appropriate, just a very low speed. I'm gonna tip it back, I'm gonna scrape down, especially if you're using a KitchenAid mixer. The bowl has that dimple that's raised in the middle, and guaranteed there's going to be sugar already trapped around that. And so I'm just scraping my bowl, scraping that dimple, and now I'm going to let it continue to mix. Now, you notice when you first started mixing, you heard that graininess, or with your spatula, you can feel the graininess. The sugar has started to dissolve, but it's not completely dissolved yet. So just mix that until it dissolves. All right, and again, I just bumped up to speed 2. You're not going to want to go more than that right now, speed 1 or speed 2. So you're using your hand mixer, you're going to use the lowest speed. And I'm going to go ahead and stop. I think I'm good. What's going to happen is it's going to look really shiny and very much the same, and you're not going to see that graininess to it anymore, okay? So it really doesn't take that long. And again, if you're not sure, stick your spatula in there, give it a little stir. see if you feel that it feels like sand in your yogurt, okay? And so once that goes away, you know that your sugar is dissolved, okay? And you could literally just mix it with your spatula too, even though we're using the mixer, all right? And now you see that it says add the baking soda and the baking powder, okay? Now, my baking powder and my baking soda look pretty good. They're not too lumpy, but if yours is really lumpy, you could go ahead and run it through your sifter and then put it into the mixer, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and drop mine in because it looks good because, you know, at least thankfully with the baking soda and the baking powder, it has a pretty good sealed lid on the top of it. At least most do. And so it's not gonna get as lumpy as some of our other ingredients. And you're gonna go ahead and mix this for just a few seconds and get that incorporated, all right? As soon as it's mixed in, and you know, as long as it's all under the surface, you're gonna be good. If you can still see a few little pieces, I wouldn't be too concerned about that, as long as it's not sitting on the top. And now I'm gonna wait 4 minutes. And so I'm actually gonna set another timer. I have lots of ovens here, let's see. I'm gonna set a 4-minute timer, and once that 4 minutes is up, I'm going to go ahead and continue. What's going to happen is those leavenings are going to start to react with yogurt. Yogurt is an acid, and so it's going to start to make it really bubbly. You see that this recipe does not have eggs in it, okay? And so I like to experiment with different things. And this recipe not having eggs, you know, I mean, you know, for one, you can eat the raw batter and not feel guilty or afraid that you're gonna get sick, because I know some people, you know, are concerned about that with raw eggs. But also, like, if you have someone that's allergic to eggs, or even if you just want to your recipes to be different and not always tasting the same. I like how moist this recipe stays, but with the egg, but there being no eggs, it needs something else to encourage the leavening. And so this is going to create a bunch of air, and it's going to make it really kind of foamy, and it's going to help us get more volume out of the batter. All right. So while this is going for 4 minutes, I want to talk about what pan you're going to be using. You saw on here that I put, like, you could use an 8-inch, 9-inch, or 10-inch round pan, right? Or you could use an 8-inch square pan. So it may just depend on what you have. So I have these. If you've been to my classroom, you've seen them before. But do you want to spotlight me for just a second? So I have these 8-inch round cake pans that we use for a bunch of stuff, and they are a little bit higher. So if your 8-inch pan is like 2.5 to 3 inches high, you can do it in an 8-inch, but if the typical size cake pan at your house is going to be 9 or 10-inch, and that should work perfectly. Or you could even do an 8-inch square, or if you're like, the only thing I have, because I hadn't read that part, is a 9 by 13 pan. You know, it's going to be kind of thin, but use what you have, okay? The preference would be an 8, 9, or 10-inch round pan, or 8 by 8 square pan, okay? And I still have 2 minutes, so I'm going to show you how to prep this. So Chef Ted, you can switch back to table view. And so when you're prepping your pan, I like to line it with parchment paper. And so to do that, what I do is I go ahead and, like, I could probably get 2 out of this because I have sheets of parchment paper. But let me move this into your view a little bit better. But I folded this over just so I can get 2 out of it, actually. And I'm putting my pan on there. So I'm making sure my pan fits on my parchment, and I'm tracing the outside of the pan. And you know what? You don't necessarily have to prep your pan right now. I just wanted to be showing you something while we were waiting. But I traced the parchment. So if you have square, you trace the outside. And then when you go to cut the parchment, all right, and you can probably, like, see my circle a little bit there. On the white paper, it can be hard to see. And then when you're cutting, you're going to cut on the very inside of your circle that you did with your pen or your pencil, because we don't want that to be in our cake. But also, since we traced the outside of the pan, cutting on the inside of the circle will allow it to fit on the inside of the pan, okay? If we cut it right on the line, it's gonna be bigger than what we need, all right? So this works out kind of good because we can get rid of the pen or the pencil, and it's gonna fit inside the pan. So I line the bottom so that we can take the whole thing out of the pan, so it's not glued in the pan. I know, we make things a lot of times, and then you're like, well, how do you get it out of the pan? Or how do I, how do I keep it from sticking to the bottom? And so this is my little trick here, and it's not really a trick because lots of pastry chefs do this. And so I'm going to use, it's just a vegetable pan spray. You could use shortening, or you could use butter, or some sort of spray that you have, okay? And my timer did go off, but I am gonna finish this so we don't bounce back too much. And I'm gonna spray my pan. Maybe. Did I get a spray that doesn't work? Let's see, I'm gonna shake it a little bit. Spray my pan, there we go, we're good. Thank you, Chef Ted, I think we're good. I could see him starting to get up. I don't know if you knew this about your can of spray, but not only does it need to be shook up, but inside the very top here, I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that red dot? Looks maybe kind of brown, but it's a red dot. Your nozzle is actually supposed to be pointing towards that red dot for it to work properly. So you're gonna spray the bottom, spray the sides, then put your paper in, okay? Press it down, glue it to the bottom, and then you're gonna spray or grease your paper as well, okay? And again, if you don't have spray, that's okay. You're gonna use butter or vegetable shortening. And if you're not sure and you don't have either one of those, but you have something else, then use what you have, and you can always ask us, okay? Can you use a bundt pan? This recipe is not designed to come out of a bundt pan. So someone's asking me about using a bundt pan. Recipes for bundt pans are very specific. It's very difficult to get a cake out of a bundt pan. So it needs to be a recipe designed for a bundt pan. So you are not gonna have great success with getting this out of a bundt pan. So I would suggest using something else. And so I sprayed on top of the paper as well. So grease your whole pan, put your paper in, grease the top of your paper so the paper pulls off your cake, all right? So that's prepping our pan. If you didn't get time to finish it now, then you sit it to the side and you can finish in a little bit, okay? So my timer went off. And so Ted, is my table still spotlighted? Okay. So you can see if you look at your mixture, it's really foamy, it's really bubbly. It looks kind of funny, like there's something wrong, but that's what it was supposed to do, okay? So we are good to go. All right, so then I'm gonna go ahead, since my flour is so lumpy, I'm gonna go ahead and sift my flour, okay? Before I move on here. So sifting your flour, it works out nicely. If you put your hand beside your sifter, tap against your hand so that it can come through the sifter, okay? And I just wanted to have that ready to go. And then you see we're moving on to step number 3, which is add the vanilla and the oil. So I have my vanilla extract, okay? And I have my oil. Oil likes to kind of coat whatever you measure it in. So it's not a bad idea. And let me see, I don't want to like mess up my camera here on the stand. But I'm going to scrape this out because the oil does coat the inside, and you tried to so carefully measure it. All right. And now I'm going to mix this just for a few seconds to start to combine that. Not too much. And just on speed 1. Not too much, because I don't want to like lose all that volume I gained from the reaction with the acid and the leavening. And if we mix it too long, it'll beat all those bubbles down. And so I just did maybe 5 seconds or so just to get it combined. And now we're going on to step number 4, sift the flour and add in 2 parts. So we talked about the sifting. Again, I'll mention if you don't have a sifter, no worries. Go ahead and use a whisk. That's gonna help at least break up your flour. And I'm gonna put half of this in. So Chef Ted, spotlight me for just a second, because I'm gonna show you all here what you can do with your parchment paper. If you're using parchment and you tried that, you can crimp it all together on one end and leave the other end open. And you can dump half of it into your mixer, okay? And then tilt it back so you can lay the other half back down on the table, okay? And now I'm gonna mix. Now again, I'm only mixing on speed 1 or speed 2, because we don't want to develop very much gluten. So we're adding a flour that has wheat. So there's protein in the flour. And if we go too crazy with the mixing, it can cause, it could cause toughness with your coffee cake. It could also cause it to have a lot of tunneling. And tunneling is when we mix something a little too much and it actually, like after it's baked and you cut it, it looks like it has all these little tunnels through the cake. I always say it looks like a worm crawled in your cake in the oven and then the worm left and it was gone and you couldn't find it, because that's what it looks like. But of course there was no worm, right? And so now I'm adding the other half, and I've not scraped yet. So if you're wondering, I only scraped at the very beginning when it was the yogurt and the sugar. And I'm adding the other half of the flour. So at this point, all of your ingredients should be in here. And I'm going to mix just until this is combined also, and then I'm going to do my scrape, because guaranteed there's going to be some on the sides of my bowl. Now, if you're mixing this by hand, you have the advantage as you're mixing to go ahead and be scraping the sides as well. Scrape the sides, scrape your spoon off or your spatula as you continue to mix. All right, so all my flour has been absorbed. So I'm going to go ahead and stop and scrape now and then mix it a little bit longer to incorporate everything. So I'm going to take my scraper down. I'm going to scrape the sides of my bowl. Okay. And I want to scrape my attachment. And just be careful if you're using the KitchenAid, it's very top heavy. So you want to hold, I'm holding the top up here. You can't see my whole hand, but I'm holding the top and keeping it from falling on me. And so if you have a sous chef, they could hold it for you. If you have an assistant today, or even a little assistant can hold it. All right, so I scraped it down. I'm gonna go ahead and go back down with it. I'm gonna go to 4th speed for 5 seconds. We haven't used 4th speed at all, but I'm going to 4th speed. Everybody say 4th speed in 5 seconds, okay? There we go. That should have been about 5. I went 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. So hopefully, but that just helped kind of combine everything, but not mix it too much, okay? Now, I have had people that are like, I hardly ever use my KitchenAid mixer. This is the first time or the second time I'm using it. With the attachment, to get it off, you press up, you turn, you rotate it, and then it should release, okay? So you might have to just play with it a little bit. Some of the mixers have springs. Some of the newer mixers, don't have the spring, so I think they might be eliminating that, but you just press up and rotate. Now, we're not going to be using your mixer or your hand mixer anymore this morning, so that can go away if you need to get it out of your way. And I'm going to go ahead and scrape my attachment off because, it's always makes it hard if we try working around things in the bowl. I see people do it all the time where they keep the bowl on their mixer, and so they're trying to work around that, but then also the attachment is still in there. So go ahead and take your bowl off your mixer. Go ahead and scrape your attachment off. Thanks, Shift Head. Shift Head helps me out, takes things away. And all right, so I'm scraping off everything. So I should just have my spatula and my bowl, and that's it, okay? So this would be a great time. We're going to pause for a second because I don't want anyone to feel behind when we get to the point where we're putting it in the pan. That's pretty important. You need to see this. So I want you to go ahead and get finished mixing your batter and finish up with prepping your pan. And we're going to meet back here in just a few minutes. I might, Chef Ted, is it possible with the music on? He's going to put the music on, and then that way you'll know, like when you hear the music start to go away, that we're going to go ahead and we're going to get our pan ready to go in the oven, okay? And if you have any Q&A, you can ask your Q&A, and we'll be here for just a few minutes letting everyone get to a good spot. Now, I'm going to show you how to assemble the coffee cake. So, Chef Ted, go ahead and spotlight the table. And it gets a little challenging, I will say, because you see how thick the batter is, okay? And so what you're going to do is you can see, you can follow along. Step number 5, spread half the batter in the bottom of your pan. All right, we've sprayed it. So when you try to spread batter that's thick in the bottom of a pan, it's going to move around because of the spray. So you have to be patient with it. So I'm putting half of mine in there, and you can see it's already trying to like slide my paper down inside there, okay? And so you might have to take your finger and reposition. And I'm leaving half of my batter in my bowl. And you could take a knife or the back of a spoon or something small so that you're going to be able to get in there. That spoon looked a little dirty, like I had already used it. So you're going to start to shift it around. And what I normally do is take my fingers, hold the paper down in one spot, and start to press it out from the center. And again, you're going to feel like you're battling. You might have to hold it a little bit. But, you know, there's enough, I mean, I will say there's enough fat in this dough that you should be able to use your fingers on it a little bit too. And so the important thing is to keep the paper underneath in the right spot. And so I'm trying to keep the paper centered while I'm spreading this thick batter on. And again, you know, I'm using a little spoon to help me, using my fingers a little bit. And you can see that I'm getting it to spread out into my pan. Now, if it's not attached to the side, that's completely okay. You can see I have a little gap over here, or maybe over here. That's good. That's good enough, basically, because that's going to all fill in when it bakes. All right. So I'll let you get that spread in. I'm going to try not to go too fast. You might be good to go. And again, this is more challenging. So you're just going to use your fingertips to help and your spoon. Okay. It'll be worth it in the end. This coffee cake is delicious, okay? And I'm sorry if some of you got ahead at the beginning. I wondered maybe some other folks did too and sifted your leavening with the flour before I sifted, and I'm sorry if that happened to you all. We learn together sometimes. So spread half. So again, just to review, I put half the batter in my prepped pan. And now you're going to go ahead and do 1/3 of the streusel. So not half the streusel, it needs to be less than half. And so I'm going to take that and I'm going to spread it on. And can you see pretty well, Chef Ted? Okay. And so I'm going to spread about 1/3 of it on. So you know how coffee cake usually has that streusel-y layer in the middle? So I'm going to put that streusel-y layer in the middle, and then the rest is going to be for on the top. Because a lot of it gets soaked into the batter. So we still want it to be crumbly and cinnamony on the top. And so we actually need more than half to do that. All right. So after you get that 1/3 of streusel on, don't get ahead of me. You need to press it down and try to get it to stick to your batter that's in your pan. Stick to the batter. So I'm making my hand, I call this a paddle, into a paddle. That's where I put all my fingers together and make it stiff. And I just lightly tap the top with my hand paddle, okay? Now, after you have that pressed down, that should be pretty easy. My suggestion is not to do one big dollop of the batter on the top, or it's gonna be very hard to spread it around. What I suggest is taking spoonfuls and placing them down and spreading them out a little bit, and that's gonna help cover it so that you're not doing as much spreading. So see how I did kind of one, I did another, and I'm certainly going to spread it out more, but this is going to help you get it on without moving too much of what's underneath, okay? And again, coffee cake batter tends to be thick, and it does tend to be a little harder to layer everything. And so, you know, doing it in stages definitely helps with that. And so I'm doing small spoonfuls, and I'm dotting the top. You can see I'm spreading out my spoonfuls a little bit to kind of help. And so I have some more needs covered up in the middle here. I'm spreading that out. And then I certainly have more batter in my bowl that I don't want to waste, so I'm going to go around to the outside edges. Can they still see well? Chef Ted can kind of help me monitor how well y'all can see, and he does have a close-up camera when we need it. And so I'm just taking the rest of my batter and dotting it around the outside, and I definitely don't like to waste. So you can see I have a good bit of batter still left in my bowl. I'm going to take my spatula And I'm going to scrape that. Look at all that batter. And so I can use that as well. Now, I'm not against you tasting your batter. This is your class, okay? So you can certainly taste your batter. And so after I've filled in as many gaps as I can, I am going to go back and even it out a little bit. So now I have all my batter on, okay? Then I'm going to go ahead and Chef Ted's going to come in with a little bit closer view. So you can see I've dotted it all on. If you want to show them the top there where they can see that I still have exposure around the outside. And I'm going to go ahead and take this spoon and my fingers and try to push it out just a little bit further the whole way around. Again, it doesn't have to be completely touching the side. And we don't want to interfere by touching the sides of the pan with our fingertips. So I'm trying just to keep them on dough. If we touch the sides of the pan with our fingertips, it's going to take off some of that grease, okay? And you might say, this is crazy, like how difficult this is. But you know, everything takes practice. So if you're struggling, no worries. I always say, like, our baked goods go in the oven and it's like they transform and they look way more awesome when they come out. So even if it's rough going in the oven, it's still going to look like coffee cake when it comes out. And now this is when we put the rest of our streusel on the top, okay? So you're going to sprinkle the rest of your streusel. Now, again, like if yours ended up more of a dough, and then you're going to definitely make sure you break it into small pieces so that you have pieces on top rather than a piece of dough laying on the top, okay? And so I'm going to spread this all out. And I'm going to use all of it, and it might seem like a lot, but like I said, a bunch of it, and I'm just going to dump the rest on there and even it out. But a bunch of it is going to end up soaking into the top, okay? All right. You can see I've gone all the way to the edges, and I've got the top coated with the last approximately 2/3 of the streusel, so it is more than half. All right. Now, we're going to go into the oven with this, and you might still be spreading yours, and that's okay. You're going to go into the oven when you're ready, but I'm going to set this for 45 minutes to start. So when we're doing a cake and it has these different layers of streusel in the middle, it takes a lot longer to bake. It might start to appear to be done, but then it's going to still have that doughiness to the center. So we need to make sure it's completely baked. So I'm starting at 45. I like to gauge things before they're supposed to be done so that I don't overbake it. So typically at 45, it's not completely done yet, but then that gives me the opportunity to show you how to check it. So what I suggest is maybe put yours in 2 to 3 minutes behind mine. Because if you already have yours in and you race to the oven and like just put it in, well, mine, you can see mine's not in yet. And so if you want to be like a few minutes behind me, just so you're going to be able to test yours as well, just pull yours out, set a 3-minute timer, and then put yours in, okay? So I'm putting mine on the middle rack in the center. If you are making 2, which I know some households, have, they're making a couple batches because it's a bigger family, then you can put them both on the same rack in the middle, okay? And you'll be good to go. The initial time, so just to kind of review how much time I set my oven for, I'm doing 45 minutes, and then I'm going to check and see how much longer it's going to need, okay? So I like to do 45 minutes. And so if you're in the oven, you're going to clean your station, take your dishes to the sink. You might even have time to wash a few dishes and start gathering your ingredients for the scones. But I will say that I'm going to be mixing the scones twice today. So with some of my classes, I have, I'll change things up a little bit. And rather than you doing it right there with me, what I do is I ask you to watch and just watch me do it and don't do it yourself, okay? So this is how the scones are gonna kind of go down. So you can start gathering your ingredients, but I'm gonna actually be going over the ingredients and mixing and asking you just to watch, and you have full control of what happens at your house. So this is my suggestion, and it's been working pretty well with some of the things. And then I'm going to be making it a second time while you're making it and not talking as much, so you can kind of like follow. But I find that with some things that's so detail oriented, it is better that you just watch and then do it like we would if you were here in class. Like when we're here in class, everyone comes up to the demonstration table, we show you, and then you go do it. And so your brain can absorb all the information before you start. And so that's what we're going to do with the scones today. So continue to finish up your coffee cakes, get your stations cleaned up, start getting your dirty dishes to your sink, and then you can start gathering your baking ingredients for the scones, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the scones start to finish, the blueberry lemon scones, and then I'm going to have you make your scones, okay? So you're literally just watching and learning right now. I know not everyone's going to do that, but that is definitely my recommendation. We find that things that have more detail to it, some of those details get missed, and so we have the opportunity with things baking for you to go ahead and watch and learn. And if you want to measure your ingredients while I'm measuring this go around, that's great, but maybe not mix until you've actually seen everything start to finish. And so first is our all-purpose flour. So it's going to be 3 ounces if you're weighing. And so let me make sure I have the right bin here. So I have my all-purpose flour. I'm going to measure out all the ingredients. I'm not going to go in too crazy detail because we've already done some of this today. But I have my 3 ounces of all-purpose flour. I'm going to scoot that bin out of the way, and I'm going to grab my cake flour. Now, so working in the professional industry, so for those of you that don't know me as well, I've been in the pastry industry for a little over 20 years, and I was working in the industry as a pastry chef for the first 15 of those. And so when we made a recipe like this, it would call for pastry flour. Pastry flour is something that is the gluten protein content of a flour. Like say, you know, cake flour is down here. You want to spotlight me, Chef Ted? So if cake flour was down on like the low end of protein gluten, which it is, okay, and all purpose is about middle, and then say bread flour is clear up here on the protein gluten scale. Well, pastry flour is between cake flour and all-purpose flour. It's right down here. And so a lot of recipes that we'd make in the professional industry, we would use pastry flour. But then when I start teaching and teaching other people to make things, we wanted to be able to be things that you can find at the grocery store pretty easily, okay? And so I noticed when I was in Fresh Market the other day, they actually happen to have pastry flour, but it's not really an easy thing to find, okay? So you see on my recipe, I'm suggesting 3 ounces of all-purpose flour, 3 ounces of cake flour, and that's not gonna make pastry flour, but it's a good substitution to get the same protein content as we would if we were using pastry flour, okay? And so if you only have all-purpose flour at your house, that's what you're gonna use. If by chance you happen to have pastry flour, which not very many people do, I don't even have any here right now, then you're gonna go ahead and, you know, just use all-purpose or half and half. Or again, if you have the pastry flour, you can use that for the whole thing. So that would be 6 ounces, okay? So I hope I didn't confuse anyone there. I don't even use pastry flour in my classes because most people cannot get their hands on it without ordering it special. And I know, like, you know, when you're baking or cooking, you want to be able to get it at the store like you normally do everything else. So we have our flour. I have baking powder. I actually am going to weigh this baking powder, and I'm getting very low. I hope I have enough in here. So 0.4 ounces. So that's not 4 ounces of baking powder. That is 4/10 of an ounce. So it's 0.4 on my scale. Wow, I'm scraping it down. I have enough though. You know, it's been challenging for you all, but it's also been challenging for us. You know, some of our ingredients we get from bigger purveyors, but they're still having challenges as well. So I think it's all across the board. All right, so I'm moving on to my granulated sugar. Now, scones and biscuits are definitely one of those things that it's such a small amount of sugar in the recipe that if you wanted to leave it out, you could. Um, and, you know, if you wanted to switch this into a savory scone, then I would leave the sugar out and add some ingredients that are more savory, and it makes a really, really nice scone. So I'm moving on to the salt now. And again, I'm just quickly kind of going through and in a half a teaspoon of salt. Make sure you level it off. Okay, half a teaspoon. And then butter, it's approximately 5 tablespoons. It ends up being 2.6 ounces. So I'm going to zero out my scale and just sit my butter directly on the scale. And that was the other half of my stick from earlier. And again, my butter still feels cold, but it's getting pliable and it's getting more soft. And then let's see, I need another 0.6 here. Yep, there you go. Doesn't always happen that nicely. So there, I'm going to sit it back down on my butter paper. Now, just keep in mind when you're weighing things, you know, if I were to sit that paper on there with the butter, that paper weighs something. And so it will make the measure a little bit off. All right, and then the buttermilk, I'm using whole fat buttermilk. You use what you have at your house. If you have heavy cream, that's a really good substitution for it. If you're using just milk today, then you might need to reduce the amount of liquid. And I realized I'm grabbing another liquid measure because I did put mine to be washed. And so I'm just going to grab a couple more in case I need them. So, you know, if you think about it, buttermilk is really, really thick. If we substitute with something else, we're probably going to need less of it. So approximately 2.2 ounces, which, or 2.25, which you have to estimate a little bit there on what that looks like for your amount, especially when you're doing a liquid measure. You might have a measuring cup that's really small. I have one at home and it's ideal for something like this. But here at the classroom, you know, all of our liquid measuring cups are a little bit larger. So I have my sour cream and that's going to be 3 ounces. So everybody has the type of sour cream they like. This is mine. I love Daisy sour cream. It's just really thick and it's really nice. But you use what you like. Okay, again, I'm putting a little cup on my scale, making it sure it says 0. And I'm doing my 3 ounces. You know, it's funny, like a lot of people that come to my classes, I always have to I love doing scones. I love making scones at home. I love eating scones. But it's funny, like if I just do a scone class, nobody signs up for it. I always have to lump it with something else so that people make the scones. And you will find, you'll be pleasantly surprised that you'll really like these, because a lot of people are like, well, I think of a scone and I think of it as like something dry and hard and it has to be dipped in something to enjoy it, so to soften it. And so it really shouldn't be like that. So hopefully your results today will give you something that you really enjoy. And I have some lemon extract here. So I'm going to measure out my lemon extract, half a teaspoon. So much about baking is the measuring. So I really have been taking the time to show you all how to measure and what that looks like even whenever I do it. And then my blueberries, I did go ahead and measure these already because I wanted to get them washed. And so, you know, when you buy blueberries from the store, they definitely need to be washed. But if you wash them too early, I think you probably know, they'll get all mushy from being just wet. And so I went ahead, instead of washing my whole container, I weighed what I needed and only washed what I needed so the rest doesn't go bad too quickly. And so I am going to use some chocolate in my scones. This would be up to you today whether you want to do chocolate. I think it's kind of fun to put chocolate in stuff, you know, that you're baking for breakfast. And so I'm going to go ahead. I'm using, I kind of had some fancy chocolate because we haven't been able to get our hands on the chocolate we normally use. So my bag is getting empty, by the way. So for those of you that have been on a bunch of my classes, this is a 58% chocolate that is imported. and it's definitely expensive, but also delicious. And so you could use chocolate chips, you could use a chocolate bar that you have, and you can chop it up. But I'm going to do 2 ounces of chocolate. So thankfully, I had this big bag before we all started quarantine, and so that's what we've been using since we haven't been able to purchase the other. Hopefully, we'll be able to at some point. And then I have a lemon. Now, my lemon is huge, and those of you that picked up ingredients from us, yours is probably pretty big as well. So I want you to determine how much zest you want to put in. I'm only going to do half of this lemon, and then I'll use the other half for the other batch that I'm making. So using lemon zest is going to give you a ton of flavor, okay? And so someone's asking right now about the lemon extract. They said, I don't have lemon extract. Can I use lemon juice? You certainly can, but the lemon zest is going to take care of most of that extra flavor for you as well. And again, it's going to be up to you how much lemon you like. If you're a person that's like, well, I like lemon, but not in huge amounts, maybe only do half of your lemon. If you're like, I absolutely love lemon and I love how it complements baking, then use the whole thing. But again, mine's huge. I'm going to be using half. Now, there's different ways you can get zest, okay? One of my favorite ways is a microplane, okay, which you're probably like, you know, a lot of people use these now. They used to be kind of a new thing, but they've been out for quite a while now, and most people know what they are. But it's a microplane that has these little razor blades. Something else that you might be able to use is a box grater that has a really fine side on it, or a little hand tool that, that does zest. And then, you know, it does like these little threads of zest, and you can take those threads and chop it so it's really small. But when you're using the microplane, the tip goes down on the table. You put your lemon on there. Make sure your lemon is washed, and you go across it 2 to 3 times, and then you turn it, and you're only getting that outside layer coming off, okay? Outside layer. All right? And again, I'm just going to do half. And that's up to you how much lemon flavor you want. I did, yeah. Chef Ted's just asking me a little question. And so what's nice about the microplane is you don't want to touch the top because it's very sharp, but when you turn it over, the bottom's not sharp at all, and you can actually scrape all that zest off. And you can see, like, I cleaned my table, so I just zested right onto the table. And then I'm going to use like this little, we call these bench scrapers. I'm going to use my bench scraper when it's time to scoop it up, or you could use a little knife or something, okay? All right, so we're going to be mixing this by hand. Everyone's mixing it by hand. This would be something that I would never mix on the mixer, okay? And so no matter how big of a batch I'm doing, I've told my students before about like satellite bowls that we would use in the industry, and they were huge bowls that were on stands to roll them around. That's what we would make our biscuits and scones in. So we never did it on the mixer because it incorporates the gluten too much. And so it's always done by hand, whether it's a massive amount or a small amount. And so what you're going to do first is you're going to, and this is where I'd like you to pause and watch. So my suggestion is for you just to be watching right now and not mixing, okay? And then in a little bit, you're going to get to do yours, all right? So I'm going to put my flours in here. And so if you're following along on your recipe, which is always helpful, we're on step number 1, the flours, the baking powder, the salt, and the sugar, okay? And so those are basically our dry ingredients, but there are other things that are dry, so I make it clear that those are our dry ingredients. And you're going to go ahead and mix with your hand or mix with a spoon, okay? And now we're going to do what I call cutting the butter in, all right? And you know, I'm still not going to try to go too fast, but I'm also going to make this in a way that you're not making it with me right now. So it's going to change the speed a little bit. And so now I'm taking my butter and I'm placing it into my flour, and I'm just tossing it and getting it coated, okay? Now we're going to be using those flaking hands again, like I talked about. So we're going to be flaking, and then we're going to be salad tossing, all right? So I'm going to pick up my butter, and I'm going to flake. I'm going to flake, okay? And if your butter's still a little cold, that's great. Flake, flake. As I'm flaking, I'm tossing with more dry, Okay, so again, I'd like you just to be watching right now. This is going to be very helpful for you. Flaking. Okay, tossing and flaking some more. We're actually going to flake the butter rather small, okay? And so I always refer to this like whenever I'm cutting butter into something, because this is called cutting the butter in. We're not squeezing, we're not pressing, we're only flaking. But also I like to refer to it as a, like if you're looking at a bag of potato chips, like a Lay's bag of potato chips, okay? You open the bag and the really big potato chips are on the top. And then as you get down a little further, there's like the broken, they're starting to get broken. And then, you know, 2/3 of the way down, they're all broken. And then the bottom is like our chip crumbs. We are going for chip crumbs, okay, today with this. So they're going to be very small pieces. And so you can see I'm just flaking, but I'm getting it to rather small pieces. Now, earlier we talked about the streusel, that there's enough butter in this recipe to make a dough. Same thing with this, okay? So we still want it to be dry and crumbly. You can see how dry this is, but look how small my pieces are. They're like, my butter pieces are the size of like the bottom of the potato chip bag. They're really small crumbs. So some of the crumbs are a little bit bigger, like this. Some of the crumbs are a lot smaller, like you can't really even see the butter anymore. And so we're going very, very small, but still dry. All right. So it's, you know, it's funny, recipes will say the size of cornmeal or the size of this or that. But you know what? It's never round. It never really looks like that. So one of my curriculum students, when I was teaching at UT in Knoxville, one of my students in my baking class was like, it's like a bag of potato chips. Because we talk about this flaking and all this stuff. And I was like, you're so right. You're like, I was like, I'm going to steal that and I'm going to use that with my teaching because it just makes sense to everyone. And so I'm not going to wash my hands now. And when you're making yours, I suggest not washing your hands either. Have everything here. Wash your hands at the end, okay? And so we're moving on to step number 3. We're going to add the sour cream, the buttermilk, and the lemon extract, okay? So I've got my sour cream, and I'm going to use either a spoon or a spatula to scrape all of this out the best I can, since we did try to measure accurately. So I hope you all are enjoying your morning. I know some people are like, I so look forward to my Saturday morning baking. So I hope you're enjoying it today. Sour cream, and then we talked about our buttermilk. And again, the buttermilk's really thick also. You might want to try to scrape out that as well. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, heavy cream is a really good substitute for the buttercream. You don't have to, or the buttermilk, I'm sorry, buttercream. We made a lot of buttercream this week with the kids. So buttermilk, heavy cream is a really good substitute, and you don't have to adjust the amounts at all. And then I have my lemon extract. I like to use pure extract so that you do get that true flavor. And now I'm going to go ahead and start to mix. Now, you can start out with a spoon if you would like, okay? And so it says to combine. So I'm going to go ahead and start mixing with my spoon. And I'm kind of taking my spoon to the bottom and just letting everything absorb, okay? And I know your hands are messy, and mine are, you know, or they're going to be messy, and mine are too right now. And so you can see how it's starting to absorb and it's starting to get thick, right? We're not going to add any other ingredients until this comes together as a dough. So now that it has absorbed most of my liquid that I just added, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my hand again. This time, I'm going to use my paddle hand. So again, if you missed what the paddle hand was, it's when you put all your fingers together and make your hand stiff, and just try to keep your thumb out of the way, or I tuck it in, and you're going to take your paddle and you're going to start to knead, okay? So I'm hoping you're just watching, because you will get more out of this. And then you're going to see me doing the motions, because I'm going to be doing it again, okay? And that helps you kind of just refresh. Wow, I just got the air conditioning popped on, and I just got a really good smell of the coffee cake. Did you smell that? Yeah, yeah. All right, so my paddle hand, and look at my scones there, okay? So I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to scrape them off. I always say, like, to my younger students, it's like a little spider of one hand is grabbing the dough off of my other finger. If you scrape one finger at a time, you can get most of it off. I still wouldn't wash though. Adding moisture to your hands will make your dough stick to you even more. All right, step number 4, I'm adding my washed blueberries, my yummy chocolate, and my lemon zest. And since you're gonna be washing everything anyway, it doesn't matter if you get dough on things. And I'm using my paddle hand again. And I'm gonna incorporate this without trying to overmix too much. But I don't want everything just to be on the outside, okay? So I'm using that paddle hand, taking it to the bottom of my bowl, flipping it over, okay? Yes, it's messy. Yes, it's sticky. And this is what I talked about. For those of you that picked up ingredients from us, I had asked the guy, I was like, did you remember extra dusting flour? And they were like, I believe we did not. And so our apologies for that. So I'm hoping you have a little extra dusting flour because we are going to be bringing this to the table. And so if you don't have extra dusting flour, after I'm done with this, you can send us a question on how to deal with that, and I have an idea. All right. So you can see I incorporated all of my blueberries, all of my chocolate, all of my lemon zest, and got that inside my dough, not just on the outside. And now this is when I would give you permission. So whenever you're making yours, I'd give you permission to either change your gloves or wash your hands. And so I'm going to take my gloves off. I'm going to put new gloves. And I'm going to clear off my table because I need some extra space now. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it to the table. So I'm going to try to bring it right here because I think you're going to be able to see better. And I'm going to use all-purpose flour for my dusting. You know, we're using cake and all-purpose in this, but what happens is the cake flour doesn't dust very well. So I like to use, you know, the all-purpose. I have some all-purpose flour here. You're going to heavily dust the table, all right? And just leave it just like that. I wouldn't smear it around. Heavily dust the table. Then take all your batter out and put it on your flour. I like to use this little tool. This is a bowl scraper, but you could certainly use a spatula. But this is a a plastic scraper that just is flexible, and it molds your bowl, and it'll literally scrape out everything out of your bowl for you, which is nice. Tip my bowl to the side. I'll use that again in just a moment. And you're going to go ahead and flour the top, okay? Now, you're going to knead it 5 times, so on a floured surface. So I floured the bottom, floured the top, you know, 4 to 6 times. And so let me show you what kneading looks like. So I hope I have everyone's attention. So I flattened mine out a little bit. So there's flour on the table, flour on the top, and I'm going to carefully fold in half, press lightly, turn 1/4 of a turn, okay? So if you were in class right now, we would say, okay, everybody say fold, everybody say press, and everybody say turn. And like if you just put that in your brain, fold, press, turn, fold, press, turn. That's gonna help you remember when you're kneading something what you need to do, okay? And I'm not really counting, but mine still feels a tiny bit sticky, so I'm gonna do one more, okay? And it's feeling pretty good now. It's a dough that I can work with, all right? Now, kneading that helped create layers in our dough so that it's a little more flaky, all right? A little lighter, not so heavy. And it also made it a consistency that we can work with it now. So I put more flour down on the table, and I'm gonna go ahead and press this out. And I like to have a ruler nearby because everyone's always like, well, how big is that? It's sometimes hard to tell on the computer. So I have this like bright orange ruler here. And so let me press it out, and then I'm going to give you a measure. So it's about an 8 inches across. And so pat it out to an approximate 8-inch disc. All right. And then let me show you what you're going to be baking on. Actually, I'll leave these gloves on because I don't need to switch yet. But I have a sheet pan here. My suggestion is a piece of parchment, but you could always lightly grease your pan. But I have my dry parchment paper that I'm not going to grease, and I have my scones, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some flour down on the table. You're going to either use like a larger chef knife or something metal that you're going to be able to cut with. This is like I mentioned earlier, this is a dough scraper, but it's also, or a bench scraper, but it's also a dough cutter. So what you can do is you can flour the edge of it, And you're gonna cut this like you would a pizza. So you're gonna cut it in half, all right? And again, you don't need to be starting yet. I know you're probably getting anxious. Cut it in quarters. You might have to press down. My pieces of chocolate are bigger in there, so I have to cut through them, or my blueberries. And then I'm gonna cut it in each quarter in half so that I have 8 pieces. Now, these scones are gonna be really big. They're gonna be like the really large ones that you buy at a bakery, okay? They're very, very large. And so what I'm gonna do is bring it over to the pan, and I like to put it in the same order. And I'm gonna show you here, there's an important part that you need to see about this, all right? Important part here. Okay. And Chef Ted, will you grab me a pot just to melt a tiny bit of butter while I'm showing them this? All right. So I want to show you. So I cut it on the table so I could cut really well, or on the countertop. And then when you place it onto here, everything needs to be about a 1/4 inch apart, but not touching. So you can see how they're close, but they're not touching. And when they bake, they're going to end up touching, and that's what we want them to do, okay? So you put them together close, not quite touching, but I put it back into a circle. They're going to bake together, they're going to touch, and what they're going to do is they're going to rise together. So that's going to actually provide you with more rise on your scones, so it's not so flat, because they're growing together. But then since they weren't touching when I put them in the oven, they're gonna actually be perforated whenever they come out, and I'll just be able to break them apart. I shouldn't have to cut them, okay? So they'll just break easily apart, but they'll be tall. And they stay more moist that way because they're all connected rather than crust around the whole outside edge. Now, I'm gonna melt just a tiny bit of butter. So I want you to see what you have at your house to do a wash, but you can either brush your dough with butter, or you could do milk, or you could do egg, or heavy cream. You know, anything is going to work. But we're going to brush the outside a little bit. My coffee cake is still in the oven, and so I'm going to preheat another oven over here. Scones like a temperature that's 375 to 400. So I'm actually going to do 375 convection bake. For you all, since you're not making your scones yet, you don't need your oven yet. So once your coffee cake comes out, you're going to increase the temperature, 375 to 400. And if you have convection setting, you'll put the convection setting on this time. And then you'll go ahead and put your scones in. So I'm going to show you here, I'm melting just a tiny bit of butter. And I'm going to be using this brush. And then, you know, it's up to you what you'd want to use to sprinkle on the top. You don't have to sprinkle anything, but other options would be a little bit of granulated sugar, or a little bit of sugar in the raw, or even the cinnamon sugar, okay? So what do you think, Chef Ted? What do we want today? Do we want sugar, cinnamon sugar? I'm going to have you grab it, by the way. Because I forgot to bring something up here. So what do you think? Because any of those would go well with this. Now, if the sugar in the raw is the turbinado sugar, and it's a little larger granule that people like to use in their coffee, that's fun on top of baked goods too. But let me show you here. I melted a little bit of butter. You're going to use a brush, or even just like a spoon, and spread a little bit onto your dough. Okay. All right, Chef Ted chose the turbinado raw sugar. Okay, very good. Yeah. So he said he had cinnamon sugar on top of, what'd you have it on top of? Oh, okay. Okay, in the deep dish pizza class? Okay, cool. All right, so I did the butter, all right? And, or you can use an egg wash, milk wash, heavy cream wash, whatever you have. And go ahead and sprinkle with sugar if you want to. With a sweet scone, it's kind of fun to do that. So like I said, this is the raw turbinado sugar, okay? So I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to let you start mixing yours, and you will see I'm going to get my station cleaned, and I already have my other batch of ingredients measured out. But I'm basically going to be mixing at the same time. Now, we won't have the music playing because I might remind you of just a few things, but I'm not going to talk through the whole entire thing. So it'll be more of you be like, okay, you can kind of like visually follow along now that you've gotten the instructions. And once your coffee cake comes out, then you'll turn your oven up. Now, my coffee cake has not gone off yet. It still has 4 minutes. So when it does go off, I'll make sure everyone can see like us checking the coffee cake in the oven and the steps to doing that. And so this is a really big bag, but this is the raw sugar, the turbinado sugar that I just used. But cinnamon sugar, regular sugar, or if you're like, I like things less sweet, this is a great thing to not add extra sugar to if you like something a little less sweet, okay? So go ahead. You have permission. Start mixing yours, and we'll be in this together. You can ask questions as we go along. If you want to pop up any questions in Q&A, please, not the chat room, in Q&A. And then also, if you need to raise your hand at some point, you are welcome to do that as well. All right, this is a class, and we're learning together. And my scones will go in the oven as soon as I have mine preheated. Y'all are doing great out there, though. Just remember, your coffee cake is done, so that part is done. And now, scones, once you have the ingredients mixed, they really don't take that long. It's just kind of knowing all the steps. And Chef Ted, if you have a stopping point at any point, you are welcome to put like some of these ingredients that are sitting out from the fridge. You could put those up. Thank you so much. All right, so just to review, someone's asking about the wet ingredients. So you're going to go ahead and cut the butter in first. So the dry ingredients go in the bowl. So my flours, my sugar, baking powder, and salt, that gets mixed first, okay? First step. And then we cut in the butter, all right? All right, so we're cutting in the butter. So someone asked about the wet ingredients, so they're gonna pause for a second and they're just gonna watch. So if you're good, you don't need to listen to this, but I am flaking the butter into my dry until it looks like those broken potato chips at the bottom of the bag, okay? All right, and then I'll get to this other question we have in just a moment because that's a great question. All right, so I'm just cutting my butter into my dry ingredients. Uh-oh, coffee cake time. All right, we might have to pause even longer here. But just to show you, for the people that were wondering about the wet ingredients, the process is I went ahead and dumped in the sour cream, buttermilk, and lemon extract, and I started mixing it with my spoon until everything was absorbed, and then I started making my paddle with my hand. So you can pause for a second if you need to, and I will get back to this in a second, but we'll definitely check the oven so that everyone else can see where we're at with the coffee cakes. It's funny, with baking, we get interrupted with the oven and we just have to go with it. All right, let's check out what we have here. Chef Ted's gonna come in with his close-up camera, so if you would just pause and glance at your screen for a moment, we're gonna check this coffee cake. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a press test in the middle, You can see that it's still very, very soft in the middle there. I am starting to get, and I'm going to shift it this way so you can see a little bit better. I am starting to get these cracks around the outside edge, which is great. That means the outside edge is done. But my center is still very, very soft. So I'm going to actually set another 8 minutes on mine. So just to review, this was in for 45 minutes at 350, and I'm doing another 8 minutes, and then we are going to check. I like to check things before I think they're going to be done so that things don't get overdone, okay? And if yours goes off, you know, check, see if you have some cracking happening around the outside edge. Do a very gentle press in the middle. And if it seems liquid or very, very soft, then you definitely need more time. I call it the press test. And so back to these scones, because you all are mixing right now. So I added my sour cream, my buttermilk, and my extract. And this was the part that I went ahead and mixed with my spoon for a while to help get it absorbed. So I took the spoon down to the bottom of the bowl, flipped over, stirred a little bit. So I did this initially rather than getting too much caked up on my hands right away. Then once I felt like it stopped absorbing, then you can clean off your spoon. And again, I know I mentioned I wasn't going to go through every step, but we do have some questions happening, so that's why I'm reviewing. And then we make a paddle with our hands. So that's when we put all of our fingers together real stiff, and we go from the outside of the bowl and flip it over. It's like we're kneading a little bit in the bowl just to get the rest combined, okay? Trying to keep your hand kind of stiff when you're doing this. All right, once it all comes together, then you add the rest of your ingredients, okay? If you haven't used zest in baking before, it's amazing the results that you get from it, the fresh taste and the amount of flavor that just comes from the zest of one lemon. And I forgot to zest the other half of mine, so it's a little messy. I got a little dough on it, but that's okay. I definitely don't throw out my lemons. I save them for juice because we do lots of classes and we use juice as well. So this lemon will have to be washed. I'm getting it a little doughy. All right, so we had a question in Q&A. They were asking about, can I make these scones in advance? And then, can I make these scones a day ahead? So my suggestion with the scones, and you can do this with biscuits too, you can go ahead and get the scones completely done to the point where they're cut out and they're on the sheet pan, okay? And then put them in your freezer. And when you're ready to bake them fresh. So don't bake them and just hold them because there's no preservatives in these. So they're best like right after they're made that day. So they're going to lose quality quickly because they are completely from scratch with no preservatives, which is a good thing for us. But put your scones in the freezer, unbaked, completely ready to go. And then take them out of the freezer, preheat your oven, and pop them in there, and they can still be frozen. And you can put them into the oven frozen, and they'll take about 5 extra minutes to bake. So today, these scones are going to take 25 to 30 minutes to bake. And if they were frozen, they would take 30 to 35, okay? But it works wonderfully. So when I worked in the industry, you know, there was no way we could mix and bake everything from scratch that day. So what we would do is the things that we could make in advance, we would make them in advance, but then they got baked that very morning that you were eating them as a guest. So there were ways like we could do that with cookies and scones and muffins and biscuits and different things, okay? My oven is preheated for my scones. So again, I'm just going to show you my scones. This was the finish. Like they had that little wash on them. I chose the raw sugar, and I'm going to go ahead and put them in. And I know you may not have multiple ovens at your house, but your coffee cake should be close to coming out. So with my scones, I'm setting 15 minutes, and then hopefully there'll be some browning on them, and I'm going to rotate the whole pan. With the coffee cake, since it's in the middle on the center and it's like a smaller pan, you shouldn't have to rotate it at all. You can if you'd like, but it shouldn't have to be rotated. Another sheet pan for my other set of scones here. We're going to have lots of scones. Sorry if you hear me being a little sniffly. All these, as soon as the weather gets nice and everything's growing, it it causes congestion to pretty much most of the year. All right, if anyone else has a question or wants to come up on camera, you're welcome to do so. And again, I hope you're having a great time. Okay. All right, that's my coffee cake again. Let's see what we got. And are you good, Chef Ted, to come over or? Okay. All right, your batter for your scones should be very sticky. So one of our students is saying there's batter for the scones is very sticky. It should be sticky, and you're gonna go ahead and, heavily flour the table, flour the top, and do those approximately 4 to 6 times. You can even do up to 8 kneads if you need to. That's a pun there, kneads if you need to, right? So don't be afraid if it's sticky. It's supposed to be sticky before you knead it. Okay, you can see I'm getting a nice doming with my coffee cake. So we're just going to check on the coffee cake again. It is now set in the middle. And if you look really close, there's actually a crack clear to the middle now. And so that gives us a really good indication that everything is done. And I'm able to press the center and it springs back. It's not leaving that indent. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. And I'm going to put it somewhere that's not on top of my oven to cool, because our oven is still warm and it'll be warm for a long time. So on top of the oven is not a good place to cool anything. And so find a spot that's safe to put it somewhere else. All right, someone else is asking how I combine the liquids into the dry. And so just to review that, again, so I had my 5 dry ingredients in my bowl, so that those flours, baking powder, salt, and sugar was all combined. I cut in my butter, and then my sour cream, and do you need me to help you out there, Chef Ted? Yes. Hold on one second here. Is it the top one? Is the sweet? No. All right, you might need to do it. Oh, okay. Is it the Chef Ted one? Okay. All right. Every once in a while, we have to redo one of our computers with Zoom, so Chef Ted had to rejoin Zoom. All right, so I know that happens to you at home some too, and that's something that we don't have control over. It's so much about internet connections and how well everybody's connecting to the internet. And so, okay, back to the liquid. Someone asked, how do I add the liquid to the scones? We cut the butter in, and then I put my sour cream, buttermilk, and lemon extract in there, and I used a spoon for a good portion of the time mixing until it started to come together. And then we used our paddle hand and started actually like kneading it in the bowl. We were pressing it. I didn't call it kneading. we were using the paddle and we were pressing it to incorporate the rest of those ingredients in the bowl. I love the questions though. Don't be afraid to ask, even if we've already talked about it. This is how we all learn. We have to hear things multiple times. Okay, all right. So I think we've taken care, I took care of both of those. And yep, okay, so it's cleared out. So we should be good. All right, I am going to be showing you how to take your coffee cake out of the pan. So if you're wondering about that, that is going to happen, okay? Your scones will pretty much be ready when they come out of the oven for you to eat. So your scones might not be out of the oven before we are finished with class today. And you know, if that's the case, that's okay, because everybody is going to be at different spots. Yeah, I will say other really awesome sweet scone combinations are chocolate cherry. So you can buy dried cherries and you can do chocolate and dried cherry. I would take the lemon extract out. You could add orange instead if you wanted to, or just do the chocolate and the cherry. Other nice combinations are craisins, the dried cranberries, with almonds. So you could use a little bit of almond extract and actually put some nuts in them, or you could put some nuts on the top. I know some people don't like almonds in their baking or whatever, so you do what you like. But those are three of my favorite combinations, the one we're doing today, and then those two others. And then savory ideas would be like you could leave the sugar out of the dough, and you could add, you know how you can buy dried, sun-dried tomato halves, like in a jar in liquid? You can take some of those and chop them. And so it would be like a sun-dried basil, and then you could add some Parmesan. So you do some fresh basil, chopped up sun-dried tomatoes, and some grated Parmesan. That's always a fun combination. But I always say, you know, do what you enjoy. So if there's something that you really, really like, you know, I've done bacon, chive, and cheddar. You know, that's a fun combination as well. And so you can think about those things where you can go ahead. This recipe can be very what I call manipulated, where you can add different things to it and still get very good results. And so as long as you're not adding too much, because you still need to have more dough than anything else, which sounds funny, but it's true. And so there needs to be more dough than anything else, but you can definitely switch out the blueberries and the chocolate and the lemon and come up with some other cool combinations. Okay, I hope everyone's doing okay out there. I know some of you, your scones are in the oven. Some of you are still mixing because we were still getting some questions, and that's completely okay. What I'm going to do as you're kind of finishing up things, I'm going to show you how to take your coffee cake out of the pan. And my first batch of scones is going off. So let me see what these look like. Chef Ted, I might have you come over. There's not a lot of browning yet, so let's show them that. So I set my scones for 15 minutes. My oven's on 375 with convection setting. And you can see that they're still very, very pale on the top. So I'm not going to turn the pan yet. I'm actually going to set another 5 minutes and leave it in that position. And so everybody's oven is going to work a little differently. And, you know, every oven in our classroom works differently. So I actually have it in the oven that works a little bit slower right now than all the others. And so it's not browned yet. So I'm going to leave it in that exact position, do 5 more minutes. Then when I see browning, I will shift it and turn it. So I'm going to show you my coffee cake here. And so my pan is still warm. So your coffee cake needs to be out for at least 10 minutes before you try to turn it out of the pan. That would be my suggestion. You could wait longer than that if you'd like to, okay? And so what's their main view right now? Low is good, low is good. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you how to go around the outside edge with a knife. There's something you need to know about this, because if I inserted my knife and just twisted my arm the whole way around and didn't move the pan, then my knife would cut into my cake. So what you need to do is slip your knife down the side edge there. I have a paring knife, it's sharp. A sharp knife is good. and it's rather thin. Okay, so a paring knife really is ideal compared to like a butter knife that's a little bit thicker. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold that knife in one spot. Okay, so I'm gonna pretend my dot is on the table right here. And I'm gonna turn the pan, and all I'm gonna do is bounce my knife up and down. So my pan is turning, not my knife. And then that's gonna allow us to gently go around the outside edge without cutting into my coffee cake and making like a big cut in it. So I'm just making sure that all that sugar and yummy cinnamon did not attach itself to the side of my pan, so that when I do turn it out, it's actually gonna come out and it's not gonna break, okay? And then you're gonna need 2 plates for this, and these are kind of large, but you just need to make sure that it's gonna fit on the plate. And so 1 plate is actually gonna go over the top, all right? And I'm going to sandwich it together, top and bottom. Now, the bottom might be rather hot. My hands, you know, not only do I have a glove on, but they're used to a little more heat than some people. And so you might need a towel underneath it, and you're gonna flip, okay? Carefully sit it down. You should be able to just take the top off. And my paper came off all by itself. It was actually still in the pan. But if your paper was still on your cake, you certainly want to peel it off. And then you're going to carefully put another plate on the top and do the same thing where you sandwich. And you want to make me the main view or both views. They're both on. And you're going to flip, okay? And so you're flipped over your sandwich. Take the lid off, and you're gonna have your coffee cake on your platter, okay? So it smells amazing. It's still really hot. Coffee cake, I think, is amazing warm. So, you know, a good knife to cut a coffee cake with would be either a small serrated knife or a larger serrated bread knife, but a serrated knife works good because you can do that small sawing action. So what do you think, Chef Ted? Would you like some coffee cake? A little piece? I know, I've been filling Ted with sweets. So I'm gonna cut out a little piece here. Let me show you what this looks like. So again, when you're using a serrated knife, I know it sounds like common sense, but rather than just forcing to cut straight down, you are gonna actually saw a little bit and you're gonna get better results, okay? So you can see that layer of cinnamon goodness in the middle, but you can see that the cake is baked all the way through and it's not like kind of doughy in any sections, okay? Now, I will say that if we, let me grab you a napkin, Chef Ted. Well, they've been cleaning everything, so I'm not really sure actually where the napkins are. I mean, good news, we've started like cleaning and getting ready to reopen. So if anyone's excited about seeing us here, we are working towards that for July. But I will say that if you check your coffee cake with a toothpick or a knife to check to see if it's done, because a lot of recipes say to do that. I don't feel as though that works well, because even when a cake or a cupcake or a muffin is done, the toothpick is still going to come out with stuff on it. And so if you bake it until that toothpick comes out clean or that knife comes out clean, it's actually going to be overdone. So that's why we talked about the cracking on the top and pressing it with our fingers, because you're going to end up having a little bit of a dry cake or dry muffin or dry cupcake if you do it the little test with the toothpick. So that's not one of my methods that I use, because you will have drier results, okay? All right, so this is for Chef Ted here. I'm gonna give that to him. And, oh, my scone timer is going off. So we're shifting over here to my side oven. I'm hoping it's my slow oven, but I'm hoping that there's some browning. So Chef Ted, do you wanna show them? And I'll leave my coffee cake up here. And we want to see your things in just a moment. I know we're running right on time here, so just a few more things before you start signing off. But you can see I'm starting to get some golden brown on top of my scones now. So I am going to just shift the pan, and I'm starting to feel set. Okay, so I'm going to do another 8 minutes, and then I think mine are actually going to be done. And again, my oven, that one, I know that one's slower. It's funny, we have 4 identical ovens here. And if you've been here before, you know that. But they literally all bake differently. And I've never met the perfect oven, so we just have to adjust to our ovens at home. And so what that means sometimes is, you know, adding a couple more minutes or it not baking quite as long as what the recipe says. We have to use common sense. Or if you're like, well, I know my oven cooks really hot, then you're going to need to go ahead and, you know, turn your oven down by 25 degrees. Or if you're like, my oven just seems to cook really slow, you might need to increase it. An oven temperature is really good because that'll help you decide where you're at. It'll help you decide how accurate it is. And so, you know, if you're doing a lot of baking, that can be helpful and kind of eliminate some of the frustration. Now, I want you to go ahead and, you know, we are nearing the end of class. I am going to stay on. I'm going to answer all Q&A. We're going to see everyone's hands that wants to be raised. We love seeing your finished products. And I'm also going to make sure that anyone that would like to is going to see my finished scones, okay? So what I'd like to tell you now is, like, if you're done and you're getting ready to sign off because you're like, well, I'm working with 3 kids, they're getting crazy, we're good, then I just want to say thank you for being here today. It has been a pleasure having you all in my class, and I love to bake. I love to teach you all how to bake, so this is definitely my passion and what I enjoy doing. But I want to say, you know, if you enjoyed class today, please write us a review on Google or Facebook. That's very helpful for our business. And tag us in photos because we'd love to see them. And it's even better if you're willing to let us share them on our Facebook page. And then we can share your photos with our customers that follow us and enjoy seeing the things that happen in our class.